All right, thank you, Dr. Barnard.
Good morning, everyone. Come on in. So the topic for our discussion today is a completely new topic. Myself and Dr. Kevin Ham is collaborating on writing a new book called How to 100x Your Impact and Income. We realized soon after we met that we had kind of a similar recipe for success, but the sequence of our steps are just slightly different. My sequence is do good, make money, repeat. I've been pretty good at the first step, not so good at the second step. Kevin, on the other hand, his process is make money, do good, repeat. He's been really good on the first step, not yet so good on the second step. But that's what we have in common. My background is I grew up in South Africa, and from the moment I can remember, I was fascinated by two things. How do you achieve impossible goals? How do you make impossible decisions? So I'm going to be talking about specifically the impossible goals today. And when you're thinking about trying to 100x your impact or income, right? Going from one, could be that I'm helping one person or teaching one person to helping 100, and then repeat again to get to 10,000 and 1 million and maybe 100 million. Right? That's what we're talking about, these jumps. The other thing I love is mathematics. So what I did was I said to myself, if you ever wanted to do 100x, how would you get to it? What's the math behind it? When you think about that, improve by 10% per year, how long will it take me to get to 100x? About 50 years. That's a lifetime. Make sense? If you achieve 10% growth per year, it'll take you about 50 years. If you could bump that up from kind of what we expect to achieve an improvement, which is what 10% represents for most organizations and people, 10% per year is kind of what's expected. We bump it up to a stretch target of 100%. I can achieve my goal of 100x in 8 years. It's a lot faster. If I can get the improve by to 10x, I can get there in 2 years. If I do it in 100x, I can get to it as in the time that it takes me to implement the change that I need to make. That's it. The rest I have to wait for the results to compound to get there. But if I could find something that gets me to 100x, it'll take me the time to achieve that, to implement that change. So I want you to just think about this for a moment for your own life. What would it feel like if you never got to step one? In a way that it met your expectations, whether it's to do good or to make money. What would it feel like if you never get to step one? What would it feel like if you only got step one done? If you only did good? If you only made money? You never got to step 2 or step 3. Right? So that's the first thing I want you to leave you with, is just feel it. Right? That's why we are so excited about giving this talk. It's completely brand new. We were working on it till minutes before. But we just wanted to share with you the way that we think about this stuff. So the next thing is my first discovery of 100x is an example that I've shared with you before, for those that have seen me before, is how long will it take you to do a one-day task? So imagine you want to do good or make money, you have to do some kind of work, right? You have to make a product or provide a service. How long will it take you to do the work? Is it possible to get it done 100 times faster? And here's the key. How long will it take you to do a one-day task? If your work was to do these tasks that take 1 day, how long will it take you? If you are not utilized at all, if you have nothing else on your plate, it will take you 1 day to do it. So the time there if I compare the utilization of me as a resource, or any resource for that matter, and that resource could be a whole supply chain or a single person, 0% utilization, the one-day task will take 1 day. If I'm 50% utilized, it will take 2 days, because I already have 50% of my time taken up by stuff, other stuff, right? If I'm 80% utilized, that same one-day task will take me 5 days. If I'm 99% utilized, it will take me 100 days. Same one-day task. So step one to getting to 100x is getting rid of all the stuff that you can to get you back to 50% utilization. Because that's enough work waiting for you to ensure you're never starved, but not too much that you're now just filling up your time doing stuff. Does that make sense? I can literally go with that single change from stuff taking me 100 days to do to taking me about 2 days to do, which is reasonable. That's almost 100x improvement. Does it make sense to everybody? That's step number one. Just look at all the things that are demanding your time and attention and budget and take off what you can. The second discovery I made was when I was starting to study, I got into manufacturing, and I was obsessed at how do we compress supply chains. And I read a case study by Henry Ford, 1926, from the iron ore mine until that ton of iron ore drove into a dealership as a Model T car, the total time it took was 81 hours. In 1996, when I started working with big steel companies in South Africa, India, etc., that owned everything from the mine to the dealership, about 9 months, the equivalent of 6,420 hours. This is how much it's deteriorated. But Henry Ford was brilliant. He had a team of people that were called traffic cops, flow cops. And all that they did was whenever a batch of stuff got stuck, they had to get it unstuck to make it flow, and then write a procedure to make sure it never happens. You do not want work to wait for resources. You want resources to be waiting for the work. Not too long, but that's how you get continuous flow through the system, whether it's the flow of work, the flow of materials, the flow of cash, the flow of ideas. You don't want stop and start. And if you look at that little diagram at the bottom there, the black portions are the work. The red one is the one that takes the longest. That's your bottleneck, right? It's a paint shop for Henry Ford. That's why he said you can have it any color as long as it's black. Why? Because black paint dries the fastest. It's a way of maximizing your bottleneck, right? But you can see if I add up those black and red portions, it's a small fraction of the total time. In fact, with today's technology, the actual work time to convert a ton of steel into a car driving in is less than 30 hours. It used to be 60 hours. The 21 hours was buffer. That's how much we've gotten work by local optimizing, by not looking at flow. Does it make sense to everybody? And when I do this graph at the bottom, then I realize how big those blue portions are of waiting time. That's how we crush things by 100 times, right? And I said, well, what if we change this graph to also give it a vertical axis? And we make those black portions or the red portions the value of the work that we are doing at that time. So the blue is still, I'm not really doing work. I'm busy, but I'm not doing work that's making me achieve more of my goal, impact income, right? So that's the blue, is still waiting time. There's opportunities to squash that time. But the black portion now, the height of it represents the value that you bring in impact or income. It can be positive or negative. I want you to imagine where you are today. and look backwards in time over your 16 years, 20 years, 25, 30, 55, 70 years, how do those bars stack up? What are the spaces in between the bars where you actually did work that made you meaningful progress towards your goal? Below the line is the stuff that we do that harm us, right? That's where we lose money, when we destroy relationships, right? What does that picture look like for you? Is it a bunch of small but relatively frequent small positive impacts or incomes that you're making that over 50 years might stack up to 100? Or is it made up by a few big bars and a few big negative bars that kind of cancel each other out? But those are our ways that I realize we can make 100x possible, right? Is avoid those big negatives. Stay the hell away from those things. Don't play Russian roulette, right? I use the example often when we teach kids about probabilities. I said, what should you do? Play the lottery or Russian roulette? Right? What's the probability of winning with the lottery? 1 in a million, right? What's the probability of winning with Russian roulette if I have one bullet in the chamber of 6? 5 out of 6. You should do it. Right? What do? We make an error. We forget about the impact of success or failure. Right? With a lottery, the impact of success, it can change our life. What's the impact of success of Russian roulette? We stay alive. We keep our head. We had it when we started. There's no gain. Limited gain. Huge gain. Does it make sense to everybody? So that's like the one message I want to, second message I want to leave you with. So think about your lifespan. Map it out for you. You know, it doesn't have to be accurate, but just as a little small ups and downs, with a couple of big ups and big downs, or mostly big ups. Where are you going to get the 100x from? Is it going to take you 50 years, 8 years, 2 years, or could you get it done as soon as you can implement the change? This is a fantastic frame of reference. I know the slide is busy and we have limited time, but if you haven't read the book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, you should do it. He basically said that you could classify any system, whether it's a person or a company, by their stress response. So the horizontal axis is negative and positive stress. The vertical axis is positive and negative impact or income, gains and losses. A fragile system is harmed more by a negative stress than what it can benefit from a positive stress. There's limited gain. I sell 10% more, I make 20% more money. I sell 20% more, I make 40% more money. I sell 30% more, I can't make any more money because I have a capacity constraint. I get stuck. But I lose 30 or 40% and I go bankrupt. It's asymmetrical against me. That's why most systems are fragile. They have asymmetry working against them. What's the opposite? It's not robust. A robust, it doesn't have a concave response, but a sort of sigmoidal response. You've got both limited pain and limited gain. In fact, the mechanisms that you put into limited pain also limited gain. It's like taking Prozac. It takes both sides off, right? Yes, it reduces the depression, but it also reduces the joy. So yes, robust is safe. Anti-fragile is what we want. We want mechanisms for ourselves and for our business that can limit the pain of negative stresses, but they also have mechanisms to fully capitalize on positive stresses. Like, for example, Uber. How do they do it, right? They don't own the assets, they don't pay the drivers a salary. So if there's a big negative stress, reduced demand, they don't get half that much. Right? And it's spread equally across all the drivers. But they have surge pricing. That when the demand exceeds capacity, it generates surge pricing, which brings capacity on board, and it tells the customer, if you don't need to go now, don't. Wait 15 minutes. Right? Don't confuse a bipolar stress response with anti-fragile. This is where you take big risks, and it can give you big rewards, but it can also be Russian roulette. Stay the hell away from bipolar. Make sense? So the last two slides I just want to share with you quickly is thinking about any decision you make. It's really useful to think about it in 3 zones. I can do too little of something in the left. I can be too unsensitive, right? I can have too few products going into the market. I can have too little capacity in my resources. That's too little, but notice how exponential the decay in performance is. It's not a linear decay, it's exponentially going down. That's where we lose 100x, right? On the right-hand side is too much. Now I'm spending too much capacity, I'm spending too much of my time doing stuff that's not needed now or not, right? And my productivity and creativity goes down by 100x. It's finding that balance of what is good enough. And if I notice I'm too much, how do I get to the middle without jumping all the way to it? Make sense? So this is true for any parameter that you have to decide on. You can have too little, too much, or enough. How do I do the experiments to get to enough? And once I'm enough, don't be tempted to mess around with it. Stay there. And then this one, I think, is also, it takes me back to when you are doing something, you want to be hyper-creative and hyper-productive. There's very good evidence that shows that when we are hyper-creative and hyper-productive, we are not 10% more creative or productive, or even 100%. We are often 100x more creative and productive, right? You can get a book written in 10 years or in 10 days. Make sense? When you're in flow. How do I get into flow? Vertical axis is the challenge of the task or the work I'm doing. Horizontal axis is my skill level. If the challenge is much greater than my skill, I get anxious. If the challenge is much less than my skill, I get bored. Where are you now? All depends on the goals you've set for yourself, right? We get distracted when we are either bored or anxious. It's impossible to be distracted when you're in flow because your sensor switches off. So how do you get into flow and stay there? If you're bored, increase the challenge. Give yourself less time to do it, increase the magnitude of the result you're going after. Why? Because the challenge has to exceed your skill by a little bit so that your mind will pay full attention. Unless there's the threat of dying, physically or emotionally, you won't get into flow. That's why I said to you, I race motorcycles, right? It's training my body to get into flow. But I train my body to get into flow when I'm presenting. I shared with somebody this morning, my motto when I'm doing work, creative or productive work or speaking, is if I'm not scared, I get scared. I'm so terrified that I will disappoint you and me that I give this my full attention. Up to the last minute before we start. So I want to leave you with this question, and I'll then hand over to Kevin. Where do you want to be? That red box represents where you are today. You're making a positive impact. You're making positive income. Where do you want to be? Is it possible to not just go up or horizontal, but to go skew where you can do the type of work that will make you achieve 100x impact and 100x income? Thank you. I'll hand over to Kevin.
Yeah, I just want you to stay here for a second. Can you do 2 mics at once? So I met Alan at Jay's event, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? And I had wanted Eli Gograd as a mentor. but I found out he passed away in 2011, and he wrote the book The Goal. So, he's a protege of Eliyahu. And as you know, and you just heard, he's brilliant in this stuff. So I invited him over to one of our strategy meetings in Hawaii, and he told me this thing. Usually in the beginning, what I do is I have everybody say one thing that they're grateful for, and then we memorize and quote from this book called As a Man Thinketh, the last chapter called Serenity. And he told me, I've been at Nike, Amazon, all these companies, I've never seen anything like this. I was studying the people to see if they're genuine. Wow, that's an amazing thing you're doing. And it gave me validation to continually do that in all my meetings. So I want to ask you what you're grateful for.
I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be every moment of the day, right? It's like there's just a now. We're just here right now. The past is gone, the future's there. We are here now. I'm trying to give it my full attention, and I'm grateful for every moment that I get to give my full attention and to get somebody's full attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful to be here. Spend the last couple of days with all of you, listen to all the great speakers, Jay, Blair, and so forth, and learn a lot. I learned a lot from just talking to whoever I could share and partake conversations with. So I'm going to talk about wealth. Obviously, Alan had a lot of impact with nonprofits, but also on he called nonprofits for purpose. And also on the business side. I have a heart for nonprofits and health, but I realized, there's this thing called money that you need to kind of operate in the world. So I want to take you on a journey, just my philosophies and kind of a little bit of what I've done. So let me just see here. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. So what is your wealth paradigm or philosophy or manifesto that you have? And I find mine has been changing gradually over the years. So as you may know, paradigm shift is something that these beliefs that are ingrained in your program, in your subconscious, and it's almost automatic behavior. You don't know why you're doing the things that you're doing. So you have to think about what are those beliefs that I could expound and understand what those things are. So it might be one of the 6 great fears that you read about in Think and Grow Rich. Fear of poverty. This is a big fear of mine. I grew up poor. Our father came to Canada with $100 that he borrowed working in the mines in Germany after getting out of countryside in South Korea. And he, so we kind of grew up in that environment, and I always thought, I'm going to make a lot of money. But when I was 14, so anyways, there's all these great fears. You can also move to abundance, right? Not lack, and there's all these other fears like illness, old age, and death. And when I was 14, I was pretty sick. I was in the hospital, autoimmune disease, and I just lay in bed and I said, if I live, I'm going to be a doctor. So my goal from 14 on was to become a doctor. And any course I got less than an A, I tried to never take again. So art, I got a C+, never took art again. And so all the subjective topics I never took. I took the ones that had the exact answers like math and science and so forth. So I finished med school. I was at UBC and I went to Western in London, Ontario. I did 2 years of family practice, and then I was seeing 40 patients a day, and I realized, wow, this is just like my father's laundromat business. And I vowed never to do things like that. I realized, yeah, if I'm not there, then I'm not going to earn a living. And people are waiting for me for an hour or 2 hours and so forth. And I just thought it was a different type of factory. So I decided to start an internet business on the side in order to make passive revenue. I'd always believed in the internet. A Bible teacher told me in in '92, he was going to University of Champaign in, near Chicago, and that's where Mark Andreessen invented the browser, Mosaic. And he told us that this is going to be a huge revolution. And I remember thinking, I want to be part of that. And so in '99, on my last shift at Pediatric Emerge, I decided I'm going to register a domain name and start Yellow Pages around some category. And so I launched Host Global. Within 3 months, I was making, it was around 20,000 US a month, which is big because in Canada it was $1.60 to 1 Canadian dollar. And then I launched a domain, the next category, domain names. And so I finished the last 6 months of my residency making $30,000 US a month, but I discovered a secret that domain names expired when people didn't pay for them, and you could register them at a certain point when they became available. So I spent the next 3 months after I finished residency, the support of my wife Irene. I don't think my parents understood, but it took me a few months to figure out that process, and then eventually I spent the next 7 years registering expired domain names, and then as I generated money, I started buying good domain names. So I built up a big portfolio there, and worked with the likes of Yahoo in the beginning, and then eventually Google. And then when Google became a monopoly, all the rev shares went down. We started at 30% rev shares on every pay-per-click on the domains. We're a top 100 ComScore website on our network, so we were making a lot of money, like hundreds of millions a year. And then the rev share started coming down over the years. And so we started pivoting to selling domains, and then started leasing domains. And now I'm on the next stage of joint venturing with domains. So our first joint ventures with Mother.com. Had a person leasing that from Turkey. He came to Vancouver. I thought he was in the top 1% of the 1% in tech, and he couldn't get investment. So I decided to invest and help him on his journey. He's 33, so I'm kind of in the mentor phase of my life. I started thinking about what's my health wealth paradigm. I usually do this for health as well. But I thought, like, if there are 3 things that I really value in terms of wealth, what would it be? I want a wealth of wisdom, a wealth of health, and a wealth of wealth, right? But what I found is I usually go the other way. I focus on the wealth, and then the health, and then the wisdom. And so I try to remind myself every day this order: God, family, people, myself, and the world. But usually it goes the other way again. Relationships, experiences, things, heart, mind, body. And so this is just kind of like my list. How do I prioritize and categorize these different things in life? So this is my family. It was our first trip by car with another family to LA. We were going to a Bible conference. I didn't know it at the time, but it was my first trip to Disney. So every year I go to Disney. I know we're here in Miami. I've been to Orlando, Disney World a few times, but I take my family to Disneyland every year. In 2000, I was flipping through Forbes, and I recall that there were like 1,110 billionaires. And I was thinking, how does someone make that much wealth? I mean, I was doing okay, pretty well with the internet ventures, but it just, that number seems so big. And so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, to make $1 million a year, how does one make $1 million? And it's $3,000 a day, you know, $80,000 or $90,000 a month. You've all been through that kind of journey. And so I started making millions of dollars early on, and then in 2005, it was kind of at a plateau. It was like between 1 and 3 million. And then I had 3 projects. One was I wanted to build my dream home. So I bought a land for 3.6 million, but you only have to put like 10% down, right? Get a big mortgage. And then second one was I bought a building that me and my mother had gone to buy furniture in downtown Vancouver. It was on sale for $12.2 million. But at that time, I recall only having $200,000 in the bank. Anyways, put an offer in, and I figured out how to get that. And the third thing was our church was trying to buy a $10 million property in Vancouver from YMCA. So I had all three of these going on. But I think back and I think, what was the belief or faith I had that I was able to do all these three things when I didn't have the money? And I'm sure a lot of you have been in that situation. So that gave me a goal to hit a certain number in order to buy the building, in order to buy the property, in order to build the house. And so the revenues that year, from 2005 to 2006, like Alan said, everything was so focused that the revenues I think went from 3 million to over 110 million in a year for the next few years. And so I was able to buy the building, pay it off, donate a bunch of money for the church to buy the property, and then build their dream home. And then I was trying to hire people, and I was doing this interview, and the person asked me, how many people do you have in your company? And I said, 8. He said, 8? Like, 8? He was so flabbergasted, and I realized at that time, I need to get validation that my company and domain names, all this stuff was legit. And that year I went to a domain conference, and a reporter walked up to me and asked me if I'm the man behind Cameroon. I'd done this joint venture with the country for the .cm. And that became, he said he wanted to write about it. I said, okay, that will give me validation. But the thing is, he put me on the cover of that magazine, which is a magazine that no longer exists, but was one of my favorite magazines, Business 2.0. This is another, I just thought of it, there's a lot of things you could put in, but physical, your soul or your mind, and then your heart or your spirit, I can really categorize and really focus on that last part that's really hidden and buried, because that's where the source, power, energy, come from, the love part. But I'm kind of toying with these things in my mind for my own personal sake. So to get into the talk, I'm curious. Probably many of you are already millionaires, right? You're in this room. There's a big price tag. Probably not the norm here, right? Very special group. When was a time that you first thought, I want to do well, I want to be wealthy, and I want to be in control of my destiny? There probably was a certain time, right? And when did you hit that first domino or that first goal? And once you hit it, do you have obviously you're here, you want to grow. So I started thinking about, wow, made $1 million. Okay, what's next then? Okay, 10 million. Okay, what's next? 100 million, $1 billion. But I remember when I looked at that Forbes 1000 list of billionaires, I prayed to God. I said, because I know nothing about business, if you make me powerful in business, I'll glorify you. And I had that prayer, and I just started doing the business stuff. So I haven't practiced medicine for the last 24 years, since the year 2000. And so I started looking at these stats. So if you're a millionaire, you're in the top 1% of 8 billion people. There's 60 millionaires. But if you get from 1 million to 10 million, now you're in the 0.1%, right? Like the number drops by like a zero, more than a zero. So like 2 million people, 10 million and over. But to get to 100 million, now you're like in the range is 46,000 to 73,000 people or households in the world. And to get to 500 million, it's close to the number of billionaires, like 4,500. And so you see this, to get to each level requires different things. And maybe it's the boredom, right? It's enough. And I don't need too much because it's going to destroy my relationships. It's going to destroy my life in different ways. And if you look at the billionaire list, there's 2,800 or so. But look at it. Go from 1 billion to 10 billion. Another zero drops off. And to go to the 100 billion, another zero drops off. So every tranche, there's very few people, like the 100x that we're talking about, and you're thinking, I have like $1 million, I want to go to 100. That's extremely hard. But you start at $1, like I did in 1999, to go to 100, that's a lot easier, right? Or 100 to, what's that times by 100? 10,000, right? So forth. So depending on what level it requires much more scalable things. This is the, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, this is the Ark of the Covenant. I don't believe, probably someone knows where it is, but it's kind of vanished, right, for a long time. But in there are three things. There's the 10 Commandments that Moses got from God. And then there's the staff of Aaron that grew some leaves. And there's this little pot that holds manna. And manna was given to the Israelites for 40 years because they had no food. They were complaining. So God said, I'll send you some quails, and then I'll send you this bread from heaven. And they were supposed to collect this every day. And what's interesting about this is that whether you collected a lot, it didn't last. Like it would it would rot the next day. And if you collected little, it was enough. There's no lack, and there was not too much. It was always just enough for the whole 40 years. And I think for me, that's a metaphor of wealth. You like what Alan's saying, there's just enough. You got to figure out what that just enough is, and it depends on your goals. I heard this story, Andy Grove and Gordon Moore, Intel, right? The founders of Intel. And they were in the memory business, memory chip business, and it wasn't going well. The Japanese were decimating the business, and they said, what would we do if we were looking at this company? They're like, we would sell this. And they're like, well, why don't we sell it? They walked out of the office, and they agreed to sell it. They shook hands, and they walked back in and said, we're out of the memory business, and we're investing in the microchip business. And that's a good lesson on sunk cost, right? So I've been thinking about what are the things that I truly want to do going forward, even though they're on my plate right now. Businesses, projects, products, services. And so when you think about investing from now to the future, what is it? You can invest in an idea or asset, company, industry, and so forth. But I think about, like, personally, what I think about is what can I invest in that gives me joy, is of value, and I believe could be exponential. It's going to be a renaissance. So in our lifetime, I feel like, wow, we're so blessed. We've been having so many of these revolutions in terms of innovation. It's unprecedented, right? And if you look back, it took a long time for the Industrial Revolution and all that. I just wanted to slip this slide in. Because we had many talks on health. And if you think about what could not make you anti-fragile, it's civil war in your body. In my case, at age 14, it was autoimmune disease where my own immune system was attacking me. And cancer is the same thing. It's your own cell taking over your body. It's not dying. It's the programmed cell death is no longer there. So it's dividing. So the cancer starts with one cell, and this one cell going to 2 to 4 to 8, it takes 1 billion cells before it's detectable. About a half a centimeter. And if the doubling time of this cell this cancer cell is, in this case, is 100 days, that means it will take 10 years. So that's a kind of a non-aggressive cancer, right? So when people get diagnosed with cancer, it didn't just happen. It probably took years for it to be discovered. And typically, when it presents, it's not stage 1 at 1 billion cells. Right? So when you go from 1 billion to 2 billion to 4 billion to 8 billion, now that centimeters, 2 centimeters, 4 centimeters, 8 centimeters. So after a year, 2 years, 3 years, people present with stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 metastatic cancer. It's much more difficult to kill billions of cells than to kill one cell, right? So I think this whole message of health, what to get rid of, that's causing, harming, inflaming your body is very important. And this is the power of the exponential growth that we're talking about, 100x, 10x. These are exponential things. So you probably know, like 1% daily, every day for 1 year is 38 times. It's huge, right? So you think 1% daily, that's nothing. To have one of something and then increasing it 1% every day, you don't really see that much growth after 3 months, but it's 2.5 times. At 6 months, 6 times. The interesting thing is, if you have 100% in a course and you decline 1% every day, you end up with 3%. So you're losing like 97%. But what happens if you map this out to 2 years? It goes from 38x to almost 1500x, and then at 3 years it goes to 54,000x. But it's hard to 1% on bigger numbers. So eventually this will plateau. I found this curve more interesting, right? So if you have something that you want to get rid of in your life, if you just remove it 1% per day, after 3 months, 60% of it's gone. After 6 months, 84% of it's gone. By the end of the year, it's virtually gone. So you could go cold turkey or you could go very gradual. So when you think about subtracting, I start recommending, what do you do? Just like one little thing that you can do to reduce. So I had this, I heard this story. You probably all know this story. But this young kid from Italy moved to Philadelphia. His father was an NBA player, and he was in a summer league, played all summer, he scored 0 points. But his father said to him, whether you score 0 or 60 points, I'll always love you. He had the confidence, but he decided he's going to score 60 points. So he thought, how am I going to do this? I'm going to practice 2 hours every single day, because most kids don't practice, maybe twice a week. And so he did that for the year. Next summer, he scored 20 points. Next year, he scored 40 points, became the best in his league. The next year after that, he became #1 in his state, number 57 in the country. And then he looked at all the players above him and figured out how I'm going to be better than each and every one to become ranked #1. He's the youngest person drafted in the NBA at age 18. But when he got to the NBA, he was only scoring 7 points a game. And so he thought, what can I do? I'm going to wake up at 3:30, I'm going to do 3 practices where everybody else does 2 practices. And in 7 years, he was scoring, 35, or 10 years, he was scoring 36 points per game. One of the best players, unfortunately, he died in a helicopter accident, right? That's Kobe Bryant. And it's just this discipline of practicing. Warren Buffett, as you know, he didn't become a billionaire. He started value investing at a very young age. He didn't become a billionaire until age 56, but just look at how it compounds because he invests over a long period of time. I don't know if you've heard, he has this kind of punch card philosophy on investment. If I only had 10 financial investments in my life, what would they be? And so he measures it in terms of like hitting home runs or grand slams. I always found it interesting that doctors practice medicine. And when patients came to me, you know, you just studied, right? And then suddenly when you're seeing patients, you don't know what they're going through. They know way more than I did. So I would bring the textbooks in, I would ask them questions, and really, we were practicing medicine. We were running the hospitals at night when the doctors left, and sometimes they didn't tell us how to do things, right? And so we had to do things for the first time, and then it got easier. And I think imploring you guys to think about practicing health, not medicine. So you heard many of those stories. Take a few of those and just do them every day. But more importantly than doing them is also figuring out what to remove, right? Because obviously you got to a state on a paradigm or a lifestyle that got you to your state. So you have to figure figure out what to remove first more than what to add. That's just kind of my philosophy. Do no harm. If you have a broken leg, you put the cast on to remove harm to that leg so your body can heal. Your body has this immense ability to heal if you remove the harm. Blair talked about sugar. I'd say right up there, if not even greater, is vegetable oils. So everywhere I go, I tell people at the restaurants I'm allergic to vegetable oils, and I can't eat anything because it's cooked in canola, sunflower. By nature, by heating those oils, you have trans fats. And they'll oxidize the fats in your body, and those oils are used over and over again. And if I ask them to use butter, they're resistant because they say it's 7 times more expensive. I'm like, 7 times what though? 7 cents? So it costs 50 cents? What I realize is restaurants are not geared for your health. They're geared for taste and experience again, right? And so you have to take control of your health. And obviously you have to also, we're in this business, so you have to think about what are those things. And it's a few simple things, right? A few simple things that you subtract, and 1 or 2 things that you do really well. Yeah, there's all the supporting cast, but nobody really remembers the supporting cast. That's what makes this hard, right? In a movie, and the show that we're in, we're the director of Bud Light, and I'm sure you have a long list of things that you want to do. And this is the realization I had yesterday. It's like retreat, right? Retreat is not surrender. And you think about all the great empires. Alexander the Great, the reason he lost, I think, is because he tried to expand beyond what his capability. I think same thing with Hitler, right? He was trying to do it on 2 fronts. Napoleon, right? Well, why is he trying to take Russia? Yeah, there's probably a reason, but it's too much. Genghis Khan, right? All the way to Spain, had to retrench. And you see the same thing in business. And I think that's why there's cycles, because there's outgrowth, and then it has to be pruned and cut back. And this is the cycle of life all throughout history, and we're not immune to it. And eventually we know the end. This is the sobering fact that life will come to an end, right? And that's why I think the legacy talks are really important. The mark that you want to leave in the world. And I think this is the reason that Alan and I are trying to write a book called 100X, because man is a growth by nature, and if you're not growing, you don't truly feel fulfilled, challenged, right? And so when we were talking about writing 10 books, 5 Fs, 5 Cs, and I really liked it, much shorter books, like 40-page books, that people could read them, maybe even memorize some parts of them, and then practice them. But we were like, why don't we do something of magnitude? Alan told me if I only had one great idea, that's all I want in my life. So I always remember that, and he sent me a couple of books. And I want to write a couple of books, but I just feel like it's a good dynamic duo. We were like Alan said, we're just in the start of it. And so when I was talking to Ken Hamilton, and he told me he had that book, How to Write a Script in 30 Days, and he said, simple, 120 pages is a 2-hour play or a 2-hour movie, and if you just write 4 pages a day and you puke it out, you'll have 120 pages. And the first draft is just the beginning. It's like your MVP, right? So in the end, we're honored to talk to you about this. And I don't know. We wanted to leave time for questions, but I probably talked too much.
Earlier, you were talking about what was the belief system that you had when you were managing the project of buying your home, you didn't have the cash, you were helping the church, and I missed what belief you had uncovered when you were asking yourself that question.
So I believe God would provide it, right? And God would give me the insight to figure out how to do each of these 3 things. And what shifted for me is as I started making a lot of money, I started to depend on the money to do it. So when I had no money, there was nothing to trust and that money could do it. So I had this strong faith that it would be provided somehow. And, you hear story after story. This is the way of creation, right? Starting from nothing to something. This is, and my fallacy is now looking at things that I had to do the things that I wanted. So my younger self reminds me of my older self to go back to the roots.
Grab the mic.
Microphone.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
We have 10 minutes more, so you can ask
Oh,
questions.
wonderful.
Got you.
So there's a big difference between want and must. Think about that. I want to do 100x. I must do it. There's no optionality. So for me, that's where I get my inspiration from, is when I move from I want to do something to I must do it. And one way that I get into that state of mind is when I start making external commitments. Because then I know I must, right? It's like preparing for this, we probably would have procrastinated a little bit longer unless, Blair and Jay gave us an opportunity to say, come present this sounds really interesting idea. Sonia, we must do it. We must get together and prepare. I have a client I've been coaching for years. It's an amazing woman, one of the most incredible entrepreneurs I ever met, and have never achieved any success because she has a safety net of a husband. She wants to achieve all these things, but she doesn't have to. And she got divorced, and everything changed. Found out that the husband wasn't that wealthy. He left her with a bunch of debt, and she had to get out of it. And suddenly her whole life changed. In the worst moment of her life, it became the best moment because she went from, I want to do something with my life to, I must.
And the other thing is I've had a lot of partners that made a lot of money and they've all retired, which is great. I feel a drive for a higher purpose, right? And those things that I had that I set out in 2000, they're like decades. Like at age 20 or 20 years later, I had these plans. 30 years later, as you know, plans don't always work out in a linear path, right? And so this winding path, wilderness, 40-year wilderness into journey, really is a process of deep self-discovery and realizing what you're here to serve others. And so I continue to work. This is the hard part. I say God, family, people, and then me. But I find myself always thinking like what I want, right? What I want. But the thing that always compares that is this purpose, this bigger vision that I have.
I told a story about the definition I got from my mentor of what is a life goal, and he gave me actually two definitions. He said the first one is it's just a dream taken seriously. Do you have a dream? Really, do you have a dream? Are you taking it seriously? Every single day are you evaluating not just what you're doing, but who you with against? Is it helping you make progress towards it? But he gave me a second definition that was more interesting but more troubling. He said a life goal is something that when you achieve it, you're ready to die. And he left me with this riddle. He said, do you agree that you could die any day? I said, yes. We don't like to think about it, but absolutely. He said, would you want to die without having achieved your goal? I said, no. He said, solve it. It's a riddle. Solve it. How do you do that? And it took me some time, and I went back to him and I said, I realized the only solution is to set your goal in a way that it's a journey that I can achieve it every single day. Every day I close my eyes, I can check, have I achieved my goal? So every day I'm ready to die, right? And if I haven't achieved my goal, yes, I should bloody feel angry and blame myself and feel shameful, but not too long, because tomorrow is another day. How can I make tomorrow the best day ever to achieve even more? So I think that's something that I definitely want to challenge you. I'm all the time challenging myself meeting Kevin has, challenged me in terms of
Make sure
how
he has
much
a-
I've compromised on the income side. I've made a lot of money for other companies. I've made billions of dollars like Jay. I've made a lot of impact. I've changed the lives of millions of people. But I also need to make enough income so we can repeat this process, right? So I want to leave you with that. It's not just what you really want, what must you have. I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you.